Hello and welcome to Leyton's Expert Exchange podcast. We are here today to kick off our Women in Business series. I am here with Beena Sharma, CEO and co-founder of CCU International and co-founder of Women in New Energy, amongst a lot of other ventures. Beena is a leader in innovation within sustainability industry and really looking to create some systemic change, and is inspiring a whole host of new female leaders in the industry. So Beena, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, how are you today?
Yeah, good, thanks, apart from the snow.
Yes, it's freezing.
Yeah.
It's very chilly.
It is.
But thank you for coming in to meet with me and have this conversation. So I think to kick us off today, do you want to tell us a little bit more about CCU International and how you came to co-found the organisation?
Yeah, so CCU International is a carbon capture and refinement technology provider. We've been doing this for, the R&D behind this has been ongoing for about 14 years. So we've been in this space for a very long time. I've been doing this for about 3 years. So we set up the business about 2 years ago to commercialise the technology, which had been developed at the University of Sheffield under my other two co-founders who have been in this space for a while. And really it was by chance, that the technology was developed. So one of our co-founders, Dr. George Dowson at the university, he is a specialist in e-fuels. So it's all about creating product or fuels from captured carbon.
Yeah.
And for many years, he actually struggled to get hold of carbon, or captured carbon rather, in order to do his research. So they went about as a team. They decided that actually the best way to be able to get hold of captured carbon to do their research is by potentially developing their own capture system that was mobile, so they could go from site to site and collect carbon from the steel industry, the paper industry, whatever industry was available to do their research. And in the process of developing this technology, they ended up developing something that potentially could be the most efficient carbon capture technology in the world. And the sort of remit behind it was obviously to make it small and mobile. And because of that, they couldn't go with conventional technologies that were generally quite large, very industrial scale, very energy intensive. They needed something that could be run off renewables because they weren't always sure they were going to have access to grid power. So in doing this, they had to look at the supply chain, they had to look at the materials they were using, and it was all to do with making the technology carbon efficient. And what I mean by that is if you're capturing 10 tons of carbon, the question is how many tons of carbon are you using to do that? And that's something that the industry is not very transparent with, but that was their remit. And in doing that, they developed something that's smaller than anything else out there, that's more efficient, that's less energy intensive, and more importantly, doesn't use any hazardous substances. So it's not putting any nasties back into the atmosphere. My journey with them didn't start that long ago. So it was actually myself and my other co-founder, Francis, we have another business, a biotech business, which is a circular food economy. And it's been going really well in Abu Dhabi. It's been going since 2016. It has launched in France and we wanted to bring it to the UK. And long story short, when we went out to pitch to investors, there was a lot of interest, but we knew we were years ahead. And we've kind of parked that business now, but we'll come back to it when the world's ready for it. But the idea was that we incorporated 4 technologies in that business to create this circular food economy. So you take waste food and you create microalgae, spirulinas, etc. And as we were talking to investors, almost every single investor said to us, what are you doing with this carbon capture technology? Or how far are you with, or come back and speak to me when you've developed out the carbon capture technology. And we just thought it was quite early stage technology. And we just thought, we're going to have to do something with this. And in our research, we found this technology at the University of Sheffield, and we just knew it was the perfect, it just synergized perfectly with the business because it was about creating a circular carbon economy. So utilizing carbon and creating that circular economy. And it fitted really well with our circular food economy. So we approached we went back to the university and we said, listen, we want to commercialize this technology. We recognize that there is far more demand in carbon capture right now than there is in our biotech business. And because we didn't have, we weren't the ones that developed the technology. It's not our baby. So we weren't precious about it. We just went with what the market was telling us it needed. And long story short, we ended up spinning out a technology out of the university 2 years ago. And this is where we are today.
So exciting and such a journey. So for those who maybe don't have a vast understanding of carbon capture, do you want to explain how that fits into the wider sustainability agenda?
Yeah, carbon capture is an interesting one, and you'll hear differing views. A lot of people will say carbon capture doesn't work. And I think this is where I play a big part in the industry in educating people on actually what carbon capture is, because most people who make those statements don't understand what it is. And we quite often use the term CCUS, which is carbon capture, utilization, storage. But actually, they're not one thing. So people will say CCUS doesn't work. They're three different things. So CC is carbon capture, and that is focused solely on technology. That's not focused on whatever you do with CO2, whether you store it, that's the technology. So on the one hand, you've got the technology, and there's all different types of technologies, including my own technology, which is, we've got conventional technologies that use hazardous substances. We've got conventional technologies that might use heating or cooling or cryogenics. Our technology is what we call disruptor technology, because it takes away a lot of the problems of those. So you've got a whole range of technology. And when we refer to carbon capture, that's what we're referring to, the technology, because it's the technology that does the capture part. Then you've got the U, and the U is the utilization. That is taking the captured carbon and doing something with it. Now, that might be a technology. That might be liquefying the carbon and selling it back into the food and beverage industry, to your Coca-Colas or your beer companies. Or it might be putting it into materials, like you can inject it into, or you can use it for like cement curing, or injecting it into building blocks, for example, locking the carbon away. And then, and that's all about utilization. Some people class utilization as a method of extracting more oil. So it's called enhanced oil recovery, which is commonly what it's used for in the oil and gas industry. That's not what we do, but some people might refer to utilization as that. Typically, the S part is storage, and that is geological sequestration. So depleted oil reservoirs where we've previously taken fossil carbon out of are sitting there empty. And the view is that, well, why don't we do something with it? Why don't we inject the CO2 into where it came from and leave it there to mineralize, stabilize over, maybe thousands of years. It could take a very long time. And the view is if we can remove that from our environment and put it back in there, then we are taking carbon out of our atmosphere. The wider problem, why do we need to do that, is because we often hear about greenhouse gas emissions. And the problem is not CO2. CO2 we need for plants, we need to eat, animals need it, we need it for a lot of things. As you can see, we use it for a lot of things. The problem is not CO2 in our atmosphere. The problem is we have too much of it. And there's two reasons for that. One is we are burning too much of it. And two is that if you think about what absorbs CO2, it's trees and plants. And the second thing we're doing is we're chopping down all our trees. So there's a range of deforestation going off, and we're also pumping more into the atmosphere. So the problem is not CO2, the problem is we just have too much of it. So we need to do something about that. It's out of kilt, if you like. It's not balanced, and we need to create that balance. And it is said by the UN, that carbon capture is a key technology in getting us to net zero. Some claim up to 50% of the reduction that we need to make can only come from carbon capture. So that kind of indicates how important this is. We talk about other technologies. Hydrogen might contribute 10%, but carbon capture has a huge application in getting us to net zero.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound like it's going to be instrumental. And you have a fantastic way of explaining this to a really diverse audience, so people from highly technical level all the way through to a very lay person like me. So why do you think that, or what do you think the key things are to keep in mind when you are, say, trying to commercialise a new technology like this for people to understand it across all levels? Yeah,
there's a number of different things, actually. And, I've learned a lot. I say I've learned so much in the last couple of years, and I'm sure there's so much more learning to go. And every day I think, God, I've learned something new, But you have to remember, this is a new space. Like, we haven't done this before. We haven't been doing... some organisations have been doing carbon capture for a very long time, not very efficiently. And, we've had so much learning along the way. Organisations have developed their own technologies over 25, 30 years. And the biggest challenge that we have is that old way of thinking. It's very difficult to change that. And I think that's where our commercialization journey was different. I'm not somebody who comes from carbon capture. In fact, you talk about my ability to talk to audiences. I don't come from a technical background. I don't come from an engineering background. I come from a psychology background. So I'm about people. I'm about engaging with people and speaking the right language. Yes, I can be very technical. I can speak on technical panels, etc. But I don't speak technical language. Mm-hmm. So anybody in the room can understand exactly what I'm talking about without having to go away and research some of the words, and I believe in keeping that very, very simple. And that's why I explain the CC, the U and the S. And I believe that's really important to explain, particularly when you're speaking to, to panels and conferences, etc. But really the commercialization journey is the way that you strengthen that is about being different. Making sure that you have a differentiation in the market. Product market fit is everything. There's no point in developing the best carbon capture technology on the planet if nobody wants it. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. And that is something that you have to do continuously. People think, I've got a billion in my pipeline. Why do I need to work with my customers still? Everybody wants this, but you need to keep talking to your customers. And that prime example of that is us starting the biotech business and then very quickly realizing that actually the opportunity is in carbon capture. It's not the biotech, it's the carbon capture technology. Yeah. And listening to what investors wanted. And it's no different when you commercialize the technology. Chances are what you thought you were going to start with and grow with is going to be completely different. We pivot almost on a daily basis. Because we're a small team, we're agile, we can do that. Something doesn't work, we can change it tomorrow. Yeah. Larger organizations, I believe, struggle with that. Mm-hmm. Because they are set in their ways, because they have experience that comes maybe 25, 30 years, a certain way of doing things. Yeah. They find it very difficult to pivot and to diversify. Small organizations, startup, particularly those that are commercializing a technology, can do that really, really quickly. Then it was, it was quite different. We've come a long way, but we also haven't at the same time. And I think when I returned to the oil and gas industry, or when I returned to the energy industry after a little bit of a break, in my head I was thinking things had changed, and I was actually quite surprised to see they hadn't. And I could probably write books on some of the experiences that I've had, just because the different experiences that I've had because I'm female and because I'm a person of colour. The importance is massive because, and again, I don't think I realised this until I started being more public facing. So stepped out of my comfort zone and put myself out there, speaking on panels, speaking at conferences. And it was only until I started to notice a pattern of what was happening. So coming from the oil and gas industry, I was used to being the only female. I was used to being the only person of colour. So I just became comfortable. So actually, people say to me, if I walk into a room and I'm networking and I see, nothing but all white middle-aged men, I'm actually quite comfortable in that environment. If I walk into an environment where there's all women, then I get a bit like, I'm not used to this. So I became very comfortable with it. So when I'm speaking on panels and I am the only female and I am the only person of colour, it doesn't faze me whatsoever. But when I come off those panels and I have a queue of young female or diverse people that say, how did you get on this panel? How did you do what you do? Do you mentor? And I'm like, I can't do it all myself. And then it started to dawn on me, people need this. They need to see faces like mine in order to inspire them to step into otherwise they think it's untouchable. It's not something that they can achieve ever because there's nobody that looks like them. The importance of seeing somebody that looks like them, I cannot even tell you how important that is. And we hear it all the time. Imagine, growing up in an industry and not seeing somebody that looks like you. You don't know that you are able to achieve. You think that you won't be able to achieve because you don't fit. And you have to conform because that's the way that working life is. You join a new company and they do something quite different from the way that you used to do it. You can't just continue doing things the way you used to do. You have to conform. And that's, as humans, we are accepted when we conform. We want to be accepted. We thrive for that. So, of course, people from a diverse background and women, particularly women, don't see those role models. And if they do see those role models, they don't see them in the public domain. And there are plenty. And then the question is, why don't they put themselves out there? And the fact of the matter is, when you do put yourselves out there, and I'm talking from experience there, you are criticised. You are asked what you're doing. What is somebody like you? Comments like, what is somebody like you doing in an industry like this? You know, and I will quite boldly say, well, I've been in this industry 15 years longer than you have. You know, that kind of puts them in their place. But people need to see that. People need to see, particularly women, speaking up and taking their position, not asking for it, and not waiting for somebody to invite them, taking that position up and saying, hey, I actually deserve to be here, because guess what? I too have 15 years experience. Oh, you've got 10? I've got 15 years experience in this. I know my shit.
Yeah.
You know, this is, and we don't do that enough.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that if I can inspire just one person to say, actually, I'm going to take that step, and I'm going to see what it can do for me, then brilliant. And it's one of the main reasons why we do what we do on the Women in New Energy program, you know, on that initiative, and why it was set up. It was set up specifically for this reason, that, you know, I was on a panel, I had so many young females coming to me, and I just said to the team, I said, I can't do this on my own. I need help. I need somebody to back me to inspire some of these women. And, you know, and we launched it, and it was phenomenal. And it just goes to show that they do want inspiration. They do want to see people. They want to say, hey, I can do it too. If she can do it coming from a non-engineering, non-technical background and lead a technical, really diverse group of people in a very diverse industry, your sustainability is massive. And if we don't put ourselves forward now, you will be 20, 30 years behind the average middle-aged white man. Standard, you know? Yeah. This isn't just something for the oil and gas industry, you know, because if we look at the oil and gas industry, we're not going to get diverse people in the sustainability and ESG and energy transition space. This is the opportunity for people to step forward and say, actually, I'm starting at zero, just like everyone else, so I can be a part of this. If I wait 5 years or I wait 10 years, guess what? Yes, every middle-aged white man that's in doing this in the industry is going to have 5-10 years experience on top of you. Yeah. So the change is now. It's not tomorrow. It's not in a year's time. The problem we have, particularly with climate change, isn't a tomorrow problem. And carbon has no borders, right? So I say this all the time. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. We all have the same. Yeah. It's such a unique challenge we have never had in our life before. Everybody in every location, in every industry, across the whole world has the same challenge. So we can't, just by not having women in the industry, that's 50% of the population we're missing out.
Yeah. And, you know, as you've touched upon, this new energy space is so new, and it's an opportunity for women to join the space and to pivot their skills and their background. You mentioned your background in psychology. So what sort of skills do you see that will be instrumental to pushing forward the sustainability agenda? Yeah,
I think there is a huge amount of skills that's required that isn't necessarily technical. Mm-hmm. And this is where I think there is a misconception, because most of what you see out there is technical training for the energy transition, right? Yes, we need engineers. Of course we need engineers. Yes, we need technical people, but we also need people who understand people. We need HR people. We need marketing people. The number of times I have a conversation, I have organizations that come to me with their marketing teams and they ask me for help on marketing, you know, some of their, maybe it's their net zero goals they want to put out and they want to get the right language together, etc. There's a whole heap of skills that's required. And somebody has got to lead these teams and these businesses. So we need leadership skills. And most people don't understand that the diverse range, when we talk about green skills, green jobs, it's not just the technical side. As much as, yes, there's a whole heap of investment that needs to go in. There's a whole heap of transferable skills that can come from the oil and gas industry. But ultimately, when we talk about new energy, we're talking about a combination of oil and gas and renewables. It's not we're not going to be 100% renewable tomorrow. I can guarantee you that. And if we do move to renewables tomorrow, then we will probably become bankrupt as a country because it's expensive. Yeah. So we need those people who are involved in, you know, even if you look at it from a decommissioning perspective, you know, those oil and gas platforms originally were not built to be taken down. And now we've got the skill set to design these assets, to design them so that they're easy to take apart. We need those same skills with renewable technology. We need them to support us to design, turbines are not going to be up forever, right? They're going to need replacing. We may not need them in the future, who knows? But we need those decommissioning skills to be able to transfer into renewables. And that in itself creates opportunity, but also it's the management side of it, it's the HR side of it, it's the marketing side of it, it's everything else that comes with that, that may not necessarily traditionally be classed as green skills, but it is, because it all contributes.
Yeah. What lessons would you say that you've learned as a diverse leader in the new energy space? What would be the key lessons that you feel that you're passing on when you're getting people coming speaking to you after panel talks?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I could probably do a whole podcast on some of the lessons, and one day I will write a book, as everyone keeps telling me I should. But I think so I mentioned before that, typically as women, we tend not to put ourselves out there because we fear criticism. And this is probably true of everyone, right? But I think women we think about it a lot more, and we think about the consequences and the consequences of the consequences and then the consequences of those consequences. And we talk ourselves out of putting ourselves forward or putting ourselves, it is the typical story of, there's a job ad and a man might tick 2 of those and apply. A woman would need to tick 13 out of the 10. It's that kind of, before we're convinced that we're good enough, we generally are a little bit more perfectionist. And even when speaking on panels, for example, one of the reasons why we quite often don't get a lot of women on panels is because they don't put themselves forward, because they feel like they need to be an expert in the topic. Whereas if somebody said, I want you to speak on this panel, and it's slightly sideways to the topic, then they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't choose it. But I see men that do it all the time. Oh, well, I only know 5% of that. I'll come on the panel and I'll say the 5% that I know. And so I think, if anything, given that I come from a background that doesn't conventionally fit into, that type of expert, I think that in itself has shown women that you don't need to be an expert in the space. And that is one of the biggest learnings. Put yourself out there, because what's happened with me is, up until about 3 years ago, I didn't know the first thing about carbon capture. Not the first thing. And now I spend a lot of my time traveling all over the world as an expert voice in this space. And I don't pay for the privilege, so it's possible. But what I found is, as I've been on these panels and spoken at conferences and travelled and spoken to different people, it's expanded my knowledge base. And I would never, ever have been able to know what I know if I had stayed in my lane reading books, or, this has come from conversations, and it's come from diverse people with diverse backgrounds, diverse way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And so I quite often say to people, put yourself out there. Don't fear the consequences, because actually the consequences is what is going to teach you. So failure is a big thing, right? What do we deem as successful, right? Typically, as human beings, we look at people and deem them as successful if they've got money or fame. And I think internally, as individuals, we need to decide for ourselves how do we define success? That doesn't define success for me, right? So success for me might be going on and speaking on a female leadership panel, for example, which I'm doing next week in Abu Dhabi, and inspiring 5, 6, 7, 8 females in the room to take the next step in their career. So I think as individuals, we need to define what is successful, and we do it in stages, as opposed to a long-term, I want to be a multi-billionaire. We do it in stages, and that will give us the confidence to take the next step. What am I doing this for? I am doing this to make a difference for those 3 or 4 or 5 individuals in that audience. And then that gives you the confidence to go to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. But if you don't put yourself out there, you'll never learn. And if you fail, it's fine, because that's still a learning, right? Absolutely. You now know, I always say, I remember somebody said to me just the other day, I was thinking about growing my team and bringing somebody in who had come from a failed business. And a comment I got was, well, why would you bring somebody in who's failed? And I said, because that person who's failed actually has more knowledge than those that have always got it right, because he now knows how not to do it. He's going to stop me from going down that same route. And this is what I say to people. Failure is an option, but you've got to be able to learn from it and turn it from a failure into a win, right? And that's the way I see it. And listen, I'm not full of successes. I've had failures. I've had businesses that haven't worked. I've had relationships that haven't worked. I've had business partners that haven't worked. And I've also made decisions in the business that haven't worked. But it is that mentality. If you're going to move ahead quickly and you're going to be ahead of the curve, then we call it fail fast. Do it. And if you fail, you're ahead of everybody else already.
Absolutely. I think the key word you said a little bit earlier was pivot, and having the ability to pivot. And one of my favourite quotes is, failure is feedback, feedback is knowledge, and knowledge is power. I love that quote because I think it surmises what you've said there really well.
That would be by far my biggest takeaway, my biggest learning. And when I speak to many people, as I do, I mentor particularly young females, that's the one thing I say, what's holding you back? And they tell me their fears. And that's the one thing they have to work on. And I'll be honest, I put myself out there. I've had criticism from some very, influential people in the business world. And I've had criticism. And what I've done is I've turned that and I've used that to my advantage. And I've said, okay, well, this is actually what's gonna drive me. If I'm told no, I will find a yes somewhere else. Yeah. It might not be you. It's not a no. It's just a no from you.
So as we've been talking about all of the great inspirational work that you've been doing as a leader in the space, and we've been talking about the opportunities that are there for women, what more can organisations do to help women come into that space within New Energy and really drive forward the sustainability agenda?
Yeah, this is a really tough one because it's not easy for organisations, and I know they get a lot of slack, particularly the larger organisations who have more resources. Yeah. It isn't easy. Typically, we do see, and we still do to a certain degree, we see women as having specific roles in an organisation. There have been times when I've walked into a meeting and people haven't known who I am in the meeting, and I've been asked to make coffee or tea or take the notes. And I see this all the time. Particularly when I speak to women, they will say, "Yeah, it's funny that actually every time I'm in the meeting, I'm the only female and I'm the only one that gets asked to take the notes." So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around women taking more of that role on and saying, actually, no, that's not what I'm here to do, or doing it in a different way, i.e. encouraging, okay, well, I did it last time, whose turn is it this time, type of thing, without being overly aggressive. There's a lot in saying in that, but then the argument is, well, why should we as women, why should we be the ones to change the way that we behave or change the way that we speak? And I think it's a combination of both. I don't think it's fair to say that we shouldn't need to do anything, because let's face it, we do. And it always helps if we can help them along the journey. But actually the biggest, and we talk about allyship, and we don't need allies anymore. We need change makers, right? We need people in organizations. This isn't about, others in the organization, particularly men, supporting women through leadership roles, giving them some mentorship and guidance and all the rest of it, because their lived experience in an organization is very different from a lived experience of a female in an organization, particularly if there are no other females in those leadership positions at the moment. And yes, every organization now has diversity, which is high up on the agenda. And obviously we talk, gender pay gap has been a big issue, diversity pay gap now for some of the large organisations they're looking at. But really what we need, and it's very similar to what I did in the oil and gas industry around behavioural change programmes. The change doesn't come from within, it comes from the top. The decision comes from the top. And it's all about leading by example. So if you have a very senior person in the organisation, not that says it for the sake of saying it because it ticks all the diversity boxes and it ticks all their targets and it keeps investors happy, but because they actually mean it. And if we see that as humans, if we see that, and if his peers see that, if his leadership team sees that, then automatically as humans, we want to impress our boss, right? We want our boss to go, oh, you're great. I love what you're doing. So they want to impress and they will mirror that behavior. So it needs to come from the top. And what we're lacking in organizations is that, and it's not just about saying it. This is the thing, show it. It's about what you do, not what you say. And there's no point, it's like in safety, I used to say, there's no point in me having the CEO standing here telling you about how important safety is if the moment he's done his 20-minute speech, he goes out, gets in his car and drives out the car park at 120 miles per hour. Everyone's going to go, well, he has to show it. And that's why I say we don't need allies anymore. We keep talking about allies. It's not about allies. Yes, allies are important, but now we need change makers. We need individuals in organizations, high up in those organizations, to come in and say, I am changing things because I can and I have the power to. And that is in itself there's a whole education piece that's needed around that. But it's starting to happen. I'm seeing it in some organizations, particularly when I've been involved in organizations that believe they're doing the right thing. And I've worked very closely with a few and I've called them out on it. And I've said this very same thing. You can't be an ally. You need to change things, because if you continue in this manner, nothing's going to change. And then they've gone out and said, oh my God, never even thought about it like that. And they've gone away and actually changed the way that things, because they have the power and they have the authority and they have the money to do it.
Yeah. Do you think that the likes of diversity programs and female leadership or diverse leadership programs, they need financial backing? Like organizations need to put their money where their mouth is and assign a budget to it? Or how do we actually affect change in organizations?
Yeah.
I say from the top, but.
Yeah, it's as much as I say it's important from the top, it's also important throughout the organisation, but also early stage. We do a lot of work in, encouraging more females into STEM subjects, for example. Getting females into STEM subjects isn't going to solve the problem of lack of leadership because we all know the best engineer doesn't necessarily make the best manager, right? So there is a whole heap of education, training that needs to go in behind. And yes, there is money that needs to go in behind it. But it isn't any less or any more than what is already being put in to the organisation, because those, if it is predominantly men, but those men in those leadership roles would have had to go through something to get to that leadership position. And it's less about diversity and equality. It's more about equity, allowing us to start from the same starting point. And that's what's not happening. We're not starting from that. We're not lined up completely. We're not completely aligned, right? Women are starting 20 steps behind, and that's the problem. So yes, there is money that needs to go into those organisations to help get women up to the same par, so that we can actually compete. Because we're not wanting to be treated differently. We want to compete on par. We want to be treated the same, given the same opportunity, and be allowed to compete for that. At the end of the day, the best person wins, right? And that's all we're asking for. Now, do organisations need to put more resources into it? I think it depends on the organisation. So sometimes and this is my psychology head coming into play here, sometimes it is more powerful for what I said before, a individual in an organisation leading by example. And the consequences of positive reinforcement are always stronger than negative reinforcement. And the way I describe that is, if you're on a construction site, as a leader, I might walk through this construction site and the rules say that everybody has to be wearing hard hats, right? And out of the 4 people that I see there's one person that's not wearing a hard hat. Now, typically as a leader, you would go up to the one person and say, you're not following the rules. And you might tell them off, you might give them a warning or whatever. And that has a strong effect on a person, right? We call it negative reinforcement. But actually, it's stronger psychologically to go up to the 3 people that are wearing their hard hat and congratulate them for wearing their hard hat and telling them, thank you for doing that. Thank you for following the rules. Imagine how that person now feels that's not wearing that hard hat, that's heard that. So the change in their behaviour is more likely to happen in that way than it is with negative reinforcement. So we need to push through positive reinforcement, those that are supporting women in the organisation, those that are helping them, mentoring them. There needs to be, we need to show that we are congratulating them, we are thankful to them, we need to push them into leadership positions to say, you are actually, or could potentially become one of those change makers in an organisation.
Yeah, you're displaying the values of the organisation, of which this is a fundamental value.
Yeah, and in some cases like that, you don't need to put resources, you don't need to put money behind it. You know, money is the last motivator. And again, from a psychology perspective, when we talk about motivating individuals into doing something, you have all these schemes at work where, you know, you get a voucher if you do this, or you get money, or you get a bonus. It's actually it's the last thing you should use, because it's, if you think about it, you get a bonus at work and you spend it on, I don't know, a TV. Are you going to remember for the rest of your life that you spent that money on a TV? No, you're not. No. Every time you watch TV, you're not going to be like, oh, my company gave me this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Whereas if you thank somebody, or if you congratulate them, or you publicly, you're always going to remember that. You're always going to remember, my boss at this company stood me up in front of, you know, hundreds of people on a town hall and congratulated me for doing this work. And that's why I say those types of incentives just don't work. Throwing money at things is good, but it's not going to give you the optimum results.
Yeah. Just to finish up then today, Beena, we talked about all this opportunity for women moving into the new energy space, and it's a brand new space for people to move in. They don't need to have X number of years experience. We can transition with skills that we've had previously. How important do you feel people being aligned to the purpose of the move towards sustainability is? How important is that in attracting and retaining talent?
Yeah, this is a massive shift that's taken place actually. In, you know, years ago, people were driven by money because they had to put food on the table, and that's still the case for a lot of households, right? But what we're finding is there's been a huge movement and a huge shift in the way that, particularly in the way that young people look at what they want to be doing. And don't get me wrong, you know, I even have members of my family that will refuse to work for certain organisations now, and it frustrates the hell out of me, because, you know, the preference is just work, and that's the mentality I come from, right? You work. You don't give too much thought into what the business does, or, you know, whether or not they're ethical, and, you know, and so that's changed. And the reason why that's changed is because we have access to more information, right? We have access, you know, we're told that a particular business invests in, you know, activities that maybe could be deemed criminal in other countries or whatever, and we make a choice, right? Or we might decide that I don't want to work for a company, a beer manufacturer, because alcohol is responsible for so many deaths. And so we have all that information now, particularly our young people, and they're choosing now. They're saying, I don't actually want to work for a company that doesn't align with my morals and my ethics. And we're finding in the sustainability space, it has become so increasingly important. I mean, they say that, and I can't remember where these stats came from, that a record number of students or graduates that are coming out of university, one of the most common questions at interview stage is, tell me about your sustainability policy. And that's telling you something, right? So quite often we talk about, what is sustainability good for? Yes, it's good for the planet, of course it is, but it's also good for business. It's also good for making sure that you can, A, attract the best staff, B, keep that, retain that staff, and it also reduces down your costs and expenses because you're not constantly having to recruit. You've not got high turnover. So it's important for so many different things from a business perspective. But there's definitely a shift happening because people now want to work for something with purpose. Anybody you speak to now, particularly young people who are coming out of university, will tell you they will already have in their mind who they want to work for. And that's their goal, that's their ambition. And you want those people because they're driven, and they will be driven not just by money and or power or you know, career. They will be driven by the purpose. And that's a completely different You think about some of the most successful people in business, the most successful people in organizations. They are very, very driven people. These are the people that believe in what they're doing. They believe in the product, they believe in the business, they believe in their role, they believe in what they're contributing. And it's important as leaders that we show that they are a contributor in this, because they want to leave their little mark on the world. Yeah. And nothing else, not even money, can replace that. And that's why it is so important. We need to be able to engage those people in the right way now. It's not a case of, this is how much money we're paying you and these are the perks that you're going to get with the job. Yeah. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Yeah. And I think that the new energy space is probably a quite a unique and fortunate position, because the mission is so aligned to, sustainability. I think that it's putting you you're in an advantageous position to recruit and retain good talent.
Oh yeah, 100%. Everybody wants to come work for us.
Yeah.
I think most of the emails I get in a day, most of the emails we get are CVs. Young people looking to transition, people from all different walks of life, different industries, desperately wanting to work into this space. Now imagine it aligns really well with your morals and your ethics, and then as a business, as a team, you're all aligned to the same goal, because individually it's so important for you. Yeah. That team in itself is going to be one of the most, if not the most powerful team. And I go back to, I remember a couple of years ago, I was in Silicon Valley speaking to investors, and again, it's cultural. So different parts of the world, there will be different cultures. And I think that's something we need to take into consideration. But talking to investors, in the UK is, it's all financial. It's all about what's in your balance sheet, what's profit and loss, what your projections are. Tell me how much money you're going to make me. Tell me how much money you're going to make me. And then you go to somewhere like Silicon Valley, and it's like, tell me about your people. Tell me about your team. And that highlighted to me the difference in the cultures, in the way that certain companies, individuals and regions look at us. Right. For the UK, it's, really we're all investment bankers, and we just want to know how much money we're going to make from an investment. You go to somewhere like Silicon Valley, they're all about the people. And I was massively confused at this. But when I spoke to an investor, he said to me, listen, you can have the best product in the world or the best idea in the world, but if you've got a shit team, it's never going to work. Alternatively, you can have the best team on the planet, absolutely shit product, but ultimately that team, if that product fails, ultimately that team is going to make something work. And the reason is because you're all aligned. You've all got the same goal, and you are all passionate about what you're doing. And that's how I see sustainability. People who work in this space want to be counted. They want to be part of the journey. Imagine now taking that and being part of the journey with a team of people that think like you.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah, very powerful. It's inspiring.
Yeah.
I can understand why you're inundated with CVs. So for someone who is on that journey, who's looking to transition into the energy space, whether that's from oil and gas or that's from something completely different, and they want to bring their skills to the table, what is your advice for them? How do they go about breaking in? Because it is so coveted to secure a role in the space.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because it's not as straightforward as to say, well, this is where you go to, and these are all the topics that you can go away and learn. And there's three different parts to this, right? There's education, there's employment, and then there's entrepreneurship. Because the goals that we're trying to achieve with net zero is not as simple. We just need people to work in this space. We need people with ideas. We need technology. 30, 40, maybe 50% of the technologies that we need to get us to net zero have not yet been invented. To me, that screams opportunity. And we need people to come up with those ideas, and we need people to do the R&D and develop them and spin them out of, if it's universities, spin them out of universities. So there's a whole host of as I said before, whole host of skills that's required. But if you are looking to get into the space, the first thing is, what is it that you want to do? Do you want to be an entrepreneur? Do you want to be working with technology? Do you want to be in a marketing role doing this? That's the first thing. And then working out where the gaps are, because there are huge gaps. But much of what we can do is, in the time when I started carbon capture, there wasn't anything out. I couldn't go away and do a degree in carbon capture. There might be one now, I don't know, but I couldn't find anything. So I did some small courses that gave me credibility. You know, I did a carbon management, so I'm a carbon management qualified specialist, and I did that. It didn't really apply to what I was doing, but it gave me credibility. So it's talking about some of the things that you have to look for that will give you credibility in the space to get you the experience that you need to then move to the next stage. And this is people always say, well, how can I get experience? I haven't got experience. If I can't get experience, how am I going to get experience? And that's what you need to do. There are other ways in building that credibility. Networking, talking to people. Sometimes these roles come up that you don't expect that are going to be there. But because when there are jobs that are opening up, if you look at the job application, the job openings, they're not asking for 10 years experience in carbon capture or 10 years experience in sustainability or 10 years experience in carbon management. You know, what they're asking for is they're looking at people who have got skills that can apply to what they're doing. They want driven, ambitious people who can be agile, who can pivot, who can bring something quite new and diverse. You know, it's a different way of thinking. And this is why I say it's perfectly suited for diverse individuals, because we typically do have to think very diversely in comparison to a lot of our peers. And it's about showing that you have the qualities as opposed to the experience. But how do you do that? They want to see that you're in the right circles. They want to see that you've gone out and you've looked at what educational pieces are out there, what courses. You get free courses nowadays. What courses are out there? Okay, they can see there's not just an interest. It's all good and well saying, I want to join your industry and I want an opportunity. And I often say, yeah, you and 1,000 people, 1,000 others. But if I can see that they're active on a board, you know, they're a member of something or another, they go to these networking events, they're in the same circles. If I can see that they're doing these small educational pieces that are offered free by colleges or whatever, then I know they're serious about this. But there's no point in sending me a CV that has absolutely nothing on it but their current role. It doesn't work like that. If you are passionate about moving into the space, you will go out and find the time to engage with some of those organizations that, and sometimes it doesn't take any time, you know, at all. So I sometimes come across people that say they want to be in sustainability or energy transition, and they're very active. And I know when a role becomes available, they will be one of the first people I go to.
Yeah. So just be proactive is your advice then.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Beena, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Before we finish, you can plug Women in Energy.
Yeah, there's actually two plugs I'd like to do.
Yeah, that's cool.
So Women in New Energy, and it's just womeninnewenergy.com, is something that started a couple of years ago. Well, I say not even 2 years ago, really, coming up to 2 years. But we launched the initial conference off the back of, I don't know if women even want this. And we launched the tickets. We didn't go for a big venue because that big venue, we didn't even know if there were that many women that wanted to be involved. And when we talk about new energy, as I mentioned before, we're not talking about renewables. What we're talking about is what new energy is going to look like going forward. And it will be a combination of both. So we want to bring the two communities together as one, as opposed to this is oil and gas and this is renewables. Because as I mentioned, there's so much learning there. I'm obviously a co-founder alongside Energy Voice. Energy Voice are leading on this. They've backed this 100%, and they, as a team, they have been phenomenal because they recognise that this is something that needs to be done. But also, we made a pledge, and I don't know if you know of this, but we made a big pledge at our conference last year that particularly Energy Voice, who are involved in lots of these types of events, conferences, that they would have no panels basically no manels, no all-male panels. And that's a big ask for an organisation like DC Thomson. So they've done really well, and really pleased to say that the first year we ran this, we had something like 250 tickets at the hotel in Aberdeen, and they sold out within a couple of weeks. This year we upped that. I think it was over 300, and we sold out in 2 days. So this year, no, that was last year, sorry. So this year we are going bigger, but we're still going to keep the conference quite intimate, but we are going to be doing lots more around it. So we've got a program of learning that's come in to support women through getting themselves prepped for, because it's all good and well saying we're only going to have, we're going to have diverse panels, but then if we're not providing women with the opportunity to sit on the panels, help them build their confidence, because quite often people will say to me, well, you're saying that women are the problem and women don't have confidence. No. The reason why women don't have confidence is because they don't get given the opportunity to practice. We're going to give them the opportunity to practice. And so then we have access to a directory of amazing women who we can select and say, right, we've got a panel coming up in carbon capture. We've got 15 women that we can choose from. And it just helps us with that announcement that we made about not having any manels. It helps us to bring some of those individuals in and create those diverse, which everyone wants to see. And then the second plug I'd love to be able to do is Internet Zero, and internetzero.org. And it is actually an entity that came off the back. It's a charity. We're going through charity stage just now, but it came off the back of some of my work with Shell. So Shell have supported this. It's been phenomenal, and we've got some really, really good donors. But the idea is that, Shell do a lot of stuff with girls in energy at school, and then there's a lot of stuff that's done with graduates. But actually, we're missing a lot of those diverse individuals are falling out of the 16 to 18-year-olds. And so we're specifically targeting that age group, but it is open to everyone. But we're specifically targeting those age groups. We are going to be going to, some parts of the UK that have very high concentrations of diverse people that necessarily tend not to go into further education. And we are going to be providing them with the option to join the energy transition space. And that's, Shell's remit is to create more jobs in the energy transition. And we recognise creating jobs is great, but what's the point if it's not diverse? Because we need diverse thinking. Yeah. So that's the whole purpose behind it. So we'll be going fully fledged, launching into it, going through charity status. We've got some amazing trustees coming on board. It's going to be backed by some huge organisations, and we've got huge support both in Scotland and across the UK. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes of that. But yeah, that is focused specifically, not just on females, but diverse. And we will join forces with all sorts of organisations, so education. So that question that you asked me about if people want to get involved in the energy transition, where do they go? Hopefully we will be able to answer that question.
Great. Yeah. So exciting. So much to look forward to in 2025 then.
There is, yeah.
Amazing. Beena, thank you again so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been lovely, and I'm sure that everyone's going to get so much from this episode. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right.